Good afternoon, everyone. I am the second non-technical person to come to speak to you today. I am not as charming and beautiful as the first one, so I hope you will excuse me. First of all, congratulations to Gubba for starting this gene bank. I think it's a wonderful, initiative. It should be one of its kind. I'm sure they will add more value to this, and then it will become kind of a model on which others can build, not only in the country but also in the other parts of the world. I want to just touch upon a few points from the point of view of the industry, because I represent the Industry Association. Of course, I represent the GM Technology Industry Association, about which I will talk also a little bit. But I want to say in general that money in the bank is less valuable than money that is invested. Right? You ask any businessman, he will say that if there is 1 crore in the bank, if he has invested 5 lakhs in his business, he is a less efficient businessman than somebody who has invested 90 lakhs in his business, right? Assuming that the returns from the business are better than the bank returns. Similarly, germplasm in the bank has no value unless you really use it to develop new varieties and better quality varieties and use them to improve your productivity. Just because you have 2 lakh accessions of rice in your gene bank, it doesn't mean anything. Like the earlier speaker said, that we are using only 12 species as our food in the world today. So what is it? I would say that the industry must work towards bringing a lot of these genes out of the gene bank or out of the wild species into actual active breeding programs and make products out of them. There is a difference between preservation and conservation. I know that this is a technical term, and I, being a non-technical person, cannot explain it properly, but I believe it refers to not only storing but also using them in actual breeding work. So I would give more importance to preservation than conservation. Well, conservation itself is very important, but I would say that anybody who is using those genes in active breeding is doing a greater service to mankind in general and to the country in particular. From that point of view, I would say that there is a difference between biodiversity preservation in general and biodiversity preservation in the farmer's field. There is a big difference between the two. I am saying this because a lot of people, and if I don't have to quote an activist, I should say that many people misquote this particular or mislead the public on this particular issue, that the biodiversity is getting destroyed. Life is about selection. We always select what is suiting us better, right? Whether it is a wife or whether it is, you can't choose some of the things, like you can't choose your parents, but you can choose your wife, right? So a lot of selections we do in our life. The breeder also does selection, right? He chooses what is right for him. The farmer makes his own selection. He selects what suits him better. So the selection process itself eliminates some of the plants or some of the genes from the active cultivation. So the differentiation is that what is used in active cultivation is meant for active commercial markets. Active commercial markets are determined by people like you and me who eat. What do we eat? What do we use? That decides or that determines what the farmer grows. So finally, at the end of the day, if we are determining what we are going to eat and what we are going to wear, that is what the farmer produces, because farmer is in a production system. It is not a consumable item that he is producing. He is in a production system. It's not like a toothpaste or a toothbrush. So when he is in a production process, he will obviously look for the demand side. What is it that is being demanded? And then only he will produce that. So I think there are both sides to the story, the demand side story and the supply side story. Finally, the farmer has to match what he grows with what is demanded by the market. And while doing so, he is selecting the varieties or the genes which suit that market that he is catering to. So there is a whole lot of selection that is going on in this process, which actually determines the biodiversity that is prevailing in his field, which is very independent from the biodiversity of the plant population in general. And so the banks, which will be used primarily to protect the biodiversity, not only in the field but also outside the field. I think that's where we have seen a lot of speakers speaking since morning, that how do we bring the greater diversity from the wild or from the field into the banks and then use them. So that's where I would like to say that using such diversity for producing new varieties is the key. So just to say a few things that I think seed and biotech industry has been working for yield increases, and I think that is one of the fundamental things that the farmer needs. Research is a very important part of this industry, so breeding and research programs are really the ones which drive the industry. So the germplasm base is the one which actually determines the value of a company. And we know that, like someone said in the morning, that there has to be a method of valuing the germplasm. Currently, when we buy companies or when we sell companies, there is a certain value given to the germplasm, which is called the goodwill, which is towards non-tangible, intangible assets, which is like the brand and things like that. But germplasm itself also becomes an intangible asset, because on the balance sheet you don't show any value for germplasm. So we have to move to a stage where we are able to value the germplasm better. There are key institutions involved in this. I think I don't have to go through this, but because we have seen since morning a lot of discussion on these institutions. But the important point I want to mention is that from time immemorial, germplasm has been freely exchanged across institutions and across countries. That is one of the reasons why we have many crops in India today. It is not that all these crops have their centers of origin in India, whether it is maize or chili or various crops. They all have come from outside. Today, we can talk about our crops being more diverse, and then we have a much wider germplasm base in the country, biodiversity base in the country, but a lot of this has come from outside. Similarly, across institutions also this exchange happens, and the biggest, next one please, the germplasm exchange happens between institutions, whether they are foreign institutions or Indian institutions, across private industry, between private and public. But there is an exchange program that is going on continuously. Before we had formal systems or formal laws, this happened informally, but now there are more formal systems coming into play. The seed and biotech industry also operates. So I was saying that when you actually have the systems of licensing and sharing of germplasm between different companies, between public and private institutions, we remember that the breeders used to go on germplasm collection trips. They used to go and then pick up germplasm from plants from different parts of the country. And we also know that in the case of biotechnology, when a trait is given on license to a seed company, local seed company, they transfer the gene into their own germplasm, their own products. And that is a very important part of the whole exercise of introducing new traits into the country. Next one. In general speaking, germplasm exchange has produced outstanding results. Our whole green revolution is based on imported germplasm, as we all know, that we brought wheat from outside and we brought rice from Erie. So there are tremendous benefits that we got from this imported germplasm. Similarly, we are also part of a consortia of various institutions like ICRISAT or Erie and others, from where we are again getting germplasm which is not of Indian origin. And there is similarly bilateral arrangements, multilateral arrangements and bilateral arrangements which facilitate this particular process. What I am trying to say is that as you read many times that we are not taking, we want to isolate our biodiversity, or we want to isolate our germplasm base and then not make it accessible to others. At some point of time it proves to be counterproductive, because you are equally interdependent on each other to have the best results in the world, to have the best results that suit India, but for which you can use germplasm from various sources. So that's the point I'm trying to say, is that this is an important area which we have to understand. I know that all of you sitting here understand, but many people outside don't understand this. So that's where it becomes easy for activists to really make it into a big issue by which we are losing control on our germplasm. Next. I just want to talk a little bit about National Biodiversity Authority, National Biodiversity Act, although Dr. Bansal made a point earlier that we should not look at the negative aspects of this, but we should look at it as a formal system that is coming into play. We have to comply with it. Obviously, we have no choice. We have to comply with that. It is a law and there is no possibility to change that law. But under this law, there are various constraints which have been imposed, which must become a part of our process now, which must become a part of the way we deal with germplasm, that you need the prior permission from NBA, Chennai, before you actually collect germplasm from any of the sources. And if you are an Indian company and you are using the germplasm to be licensing products to a foreign company, or you are selling an Indian company to a foreign company, these are all situations in which you need to take prior permission. Similarly, any company which has a foreign shareholding or a foreigner as a manager or a foreigner in the board has to take prior permission for accessing any biological resources, not only plant but also even microorganisms and animals. So the entire bioassay processes that are conducted by multinationals have come under the purview of this. So there are various things which are imposed under this. It is okay in the sense that the industry is trying to cope with this, but I think the challenge is mainly in terms of how quickly NBA is able to dispose of applications. I think that is an area which still is a challenge for us, because I think many people, while they are still trying to figure out the process, but some of them who figured out the process and made applications, still there is no progress with regard to the processing of the applications. So I think from that point of view, Doctor, you also know this story. So we need to find some ways by which we can either we can help NBA to do this better, or NBA itself must come up with a mechanism by which they can dispose of applications much faster and facilitate free flow of germplasm. This is a very important aspect which could seriously constrain development of new varieties in the country. Next one. I want to just address one misconception which is propagated by the activists again, which say that biodiversity of the country is destroyed because of GM crops. And I want to address this by explaining that, bringing back the explanation I gave in the beginning, that biodiversity, when you refer to biodiversity in the farmer's field, is different from biodiversity outside. So from the farmer's field also, the GM technology by itself does not add any additional risk to the biodiversity that is existing in the farmer's field. And I really don't understand how the choice of a crop by the farmer is seen as a choice of is a loss of biodiversity. For example, US has shifted to, US is now growing mostly 3 or 4 crops. Okay, their entire food consists of maize and soybean and wheat, and so these are the major crops which have, from a wide diverse crop portfolio they have reduced, and this is quoted as an example of loss of biodiversity due to GM technology, which is completely wrong. I think, like I mentioned in the beginning, it is the food that people eat which determines what the farmer grows. If the food is undergoing changes because of various factors, it could be nutrition related factors, it could be really income related factors or education related factors, or just the food companies propagating certain types of foods in the market. There are famous books on this, that the carnivore's dilemma, if you read, they will tell you how a food company and the media and nutritionists, 3 together, can determine what we all eat, right? So those are the things which can be happening, but those are not related to the technology that is being used by the farmer. These are completely independent events. So depending on what the market wants, the farmer is growing certain crops, which doesn't mean loss of biodiversity. So this is the point I am trying to make here, Point number one. Point number two is that biodiversity anyway is reduced in the farmer's field through the breeding process. This we all know that over a period of time through selections we reduce the level of diversity in the farmer's field and narrow it down to only those plants which deliver maximum value to the farmer. So that is also a natural process that is going on for centuries together. Farmer himself was doing it earlier. Now the companies do that. Breeders